China was on track to surpass the United States and take over as the greatest economy in the world just a few years ago. Many people believed that this would occur as soon as 2024 and 2014. China's transformation from a third world nation to a world superpower in a couple of decades has been dubbed by many as an economic miracle. Few people anticipated the implications that the late 1970s economic reform would have on the emerging nation. Soon, more and more Chinese businesses started to appear on lists of the biggest corporations in the world. The nation was one of the most significant trading partners on a worldwide scale, helping to drive globalization on a never-before-seen scale. Influence followed the power. A few years later, China is faced with a wide range of political and economic issues. Recent problems for the country include a disastrous zero-COVID policy, a real estate debt crisis, problems with external infrastructure, problems with internal debt, a minor youth uprising, and a weakening economy. The consequences of these problems pose a threat to the nation's very political systems. How did China get here? And what are the repercussions for both China and the rest of the world? So settle in, fasten your seatbelts, and get ready for a crazy trip. Let's start with comprehending the topic that has received the greatest attention: the real estate bubble. Economic reform, which started in 1979, was the catalyst for the majority of expansion in both the Chinese economy and the housing market. China began to open up to the rest of the world from this point. People moved in large numbers from rural areas to the major urban centers in an effort to enhance their quality of life.
Hundreds of millions of sons, and particularly daughters, of Chinese farmers who moved from the farm where they were earning really the same as they were earning 1,000 years ago in Chinese history, absolute subsistence wages. They traveled 4 or 5 hours to the local city, and there they began working in the big factories, the workshop of the world.
As a result, China's population changed in 4 decades from being primarily rural to now consisting of 2/3 of people living in major urban centers. In addition to relocations, a cultural factor also helped increase housing sales. Real estate ownership was regarded as both a requirement for getting married.
As a result of the one-child policy and the Chinese preferring male heirs, there are 35 million more men than women in China. That creates intense competition for brides, with men often having to prove their material worth. This often means owning a home.
And a source of stability for a family's finances. This resulted in entire families and their friends pooling money to help their relatives buy a house. Why? One could ponder. Because apartment prices have become so out of control. China's housing affordability is among the worst in the world. According to the Financial Times, the average person would need 50 years to save up enough money after accounting for living costs to purchase an apartment. One significant distinction between the Chinese and Western real estate markets is the way in which money is pooled together. Major supply problems were caused by a lack of inventories, delayed development, and quick growth. As a result, housing affordability became a problem for local government and prices increased. The approach involved granting loans to businesses engaged in real estate development and lowering the requirements for personal credit loans. These factors caused the Chinese real estate industry to take off and fuel the country's rapid economic expansion. Some businesses, such as the infamous Evergrande, seized this opportunity and quickly grew, helped in large part by the accessibility of low-cost borrowing. Evergrande grew to be so big that they even invested some of the money on a theme park and a soccer team. Here is how the theme park now seems. You'll understand why in a moment. It's a horrible loss of time, money, and resources overall. These real estate institutions frequently pushed their projects into foreign markets and quickly grew to be the biggest in the nation. In 2020, sales of commercial real estate totaled $2.7 trillion. Currently, the real estate industry in China is where the general populace has stored around 70% of their overall income. Let me say that again. The real estate market is where they keep 70% of their overall wealth. However, there was still a shortage of homes, partially as a result of speculation as an investment. Buying a second or third property was not uncommon because it was regarded as prudent and reliable. A clever approach was developed by developers in response to the seemingly endless requirement to support growth. They were supported by two main pillars. They initially started using international debt to fund their operations. Global demand for Chinese debt and equity was rising as a result of the country's rapid economic expansion and its alluring yields. Second, developers produced pre-sale choices for customers that swiftly turned into the standard across the nation. In it, purchasers of real estate would pay builders for a house that has not yet been constructed. All they had was the assurance that it would be theirs once it was finished.
The whole construction period would take about 2 to 3 years usually, and people will start paying their mortgage way before the completion of the project.
Are we talking about months or years?
Years, even years, maybe over a year, over a year and a half. In the past, it wasn't seen as a risky business because, as I said, and people would not expect developers cannot complete their home at a large scale, not like now.
While this made sense from both sides' perspectives, it quickly got out of hand due to lax rules about how much money real estate developers had to keep. They started manipulating the system to their benefit. They were able to begin new projects without finishing the previous ones by securing pre-sales. They would utilize a portion of the pre-sales from the new projects to fund the actual construction, while using the remaining funds to fund future projects, and so forth. In essence, they devised a Ponzi scheme that was entirely dependent on the steady and unceasing expansion of the property market. The plan, however, began to unravel when the population growth in large cities decreased from 4.1% in 1996 to 2.1% in 2020. Pre-sales began to slacken, and developers began to rely more and more on banks and foreign debt to fund expansion. When the loan payment was too high to be covered by operational profits, they had to take on more debt to fulfill their commitments. For a while, everything went on, but soon the Chinese government joined the plan. The Three Red Lines policy was put into effect by the Chinese government in August of that year. Each line denotes a debt ratio that the businesses were required to abide by. If not, it would significantly limit their ability to take on new liabilities. Developers with enormous debt loads, like Evergrande, crossed all three lines, preventing them from adding to their liabilities. Evergrande quickly began to experience liquidity issues because they financed its prior liabilities with debt. First, they neglected to compensate wealth managers who had made direct investments in the business, which led to a massive uprising by investors and wealth managers who protested at their headquarters.
In September 2021, there was a hugely crucial moment.
Evergrande missed payments on wealth management products. The wealth management market in China is where ordinary people can put their savings, and the money is usually going into real estate, often to companies like Evergrande. And these people who had invested hadn't got their money back. They descended on the headquarters of Evergrande in Shenzhen.
We don't know where to get our money. And now we go to Shenzhen government and nobody help us.
This was the point at which it went from it might be a crisis to, well, it probably is a crisis.
Evergrande soon began to fall behind on its bond payments in dollars, and these debts were sold to the West. They weren't the only real estate company having problems, though. The real estate developer Kaiser neglected to pay a $400 million bond in November 2021. Shimero Group also missed a payment on a $101 million loan in January 2022, and most recently, Yuzo Group asked to put off paying $582 million in offshore bonds. This has a significant negative impact on both internal and external trust in the Chinese housing and bond markets. This culminated in mortgage strikes by eminent buyers who were making their monthly payments but seeing little improvement on the house they had purchased. It's estimated that around 320 homeowner groups have so far refused to make mortgage loan payments.
Anger erupting among Chinese home buyers as property developers hold construction on their homes.
这种希望破灭的那种感觉，就有点万念俱灰了。
Since July, homebuyers in over 100 cities across China have declared a mortgage boycott. Just like Tian, many homebuyers are desperate. Some have taken to street demonstrations, but these have been quickly quashed, with officials citing COVID concerns. Backed into a corner, homebuyers have threatened to stop payments on their mortgage in over 300 projects.
These debts are worth between $150 and $300 billion. According to estimates, since then, the Chinese government has loosened the regulations a little. Additionally, in an effort to stimulate the lending and housing markets, the Chinese central bank has lowered interest rates. We'll have to wait and watch how this plays out. It's unclear whether the situation will improve or if additional real estate developers will fail, sparking discontent. In addition to all of this, the real estate sector contributes close to 30% of China's annual GDP. There will be repercussions if the real estate sectors collapse. Banks, regional administrations, and China's stability are all at stake. Then, while all of that may seem awful, other debt problems are starting to show their ugly heads. There have been several costly infrastructure projects that are heavily indebted. The Superspeed Railroad is one well-known example. After the financial crisis of 2008, the infrastructure project was launched in an effort to stimulate the economy and increase employment. It was a traditional fiscal policy improvement that was flawless. Millions of people found work thanks to the program, which also single-handedly brought some industrial sectors like steel and concrete out of default. This was a major factor in China avoiding the unrest that the majority of other nations experienced during the 2008 financial crisis. Although it prevented a recession, issues emerged as soon as construction was complete. The demand wasn't always there because the train only went to secondary locations rather than major ones. In addition, the majority of the population couldn't afford the admission fees. It's possible that the lack of income wasn't a problem. However, this project was financed by enormous amounts of debt taken out by big banks, regional authorities, and certain bonds that were sold to the public. Since 2015, just the interest on these payments has exceeded the project's operating income. Yes, the interest on the debt has outpaced the company's earnings. Their total liabilities are 5.9 trillion yuan, $900 billion as of 2021, 5% of the Chinese GDP. To put it another way, most of these obligations are bonds that were distributed to state banks. The use of the rail infrastructure has decreased even further as a result of these zero-COVID lockdowns. The Chinese government responded by announcing an economic stimulus plan to revive the COVID-affected sector. This included enabling the China Railway to issue more bonds for the building of railroads totaling 300 billion yuan. They are investing more money in a project that is already losing money. It appears that China is prioritizing aesthetics over efficiency and profitability, which can lead to serious problems if not corrected. There are a lot of ghost cities in China as a result of excessive debt expansion, financial considerations, and bad planning. According to the Financial Times,
the ratio of empty apartments in China could range between 10% and as high as 40 or even 50% in some small cities.
There are enough empty homes in China right now to house about 90 million people, greater than the population of Germany or the UK.
Newer developments were built quite quickly without a lot of consideration for, the logistics.
I've traveled to many parts of China where you go to a suburb and suddenly you see this forest of apartment blocks. Carry on for 5-10 minutes in your taxi and you're still going through apartment block after apartment block with nobody in them.
I visited one of the more famous ghost cities, Ordos, in the middle of the desert, very far away from anything. It was quite strange because it's not like there's necessarily jobs there.
in addition to its internal financial problems, China is having difficulties with its infrastructure development abroad. The Grand Belt and Road Initiative poses the risk of being one of the most unsuccessful global initiatives ever. The project represents a significant investment in more than 100 nations. It is China's ambitious effort to expand both its influence and its worldwide connections, strengthening theoretically its import-export markets. However, investing in hazardous nations is exactly that risky. These investments might also end up being extremely unsuccessful endeavors if the calculations are not done properly. China has to renegotiate more than $52 billion in debt in just 2020 and 2021. And many of the nations with which it does business are unable or unwilling to make the payments. Because to the Belt and Road Initiative, China has surpassed both the World Bank and the IMF as the largest provider of development financing worldwide. The state government is likely to continue funding this initiative because it is political in character and hence unlikely to be profitable. Chinese involvement in other countries' foreign affairs could give it tremendous geopolitical clout, but it also carries the possibility of disastrous results for China's financial stability and political stability. The Chinese government still backs a zero-COVID policy. On paper, there was a strategy to get rid of the illness. The government needed to be viewed as capable and able to handle any situation that arose. And for a while, it was effective. As of right now, over 5,000 people have died from the virus in China, compared to over 1 million in the US. According to government figures, no matter how fabricated these figures may be, the government might use them as justification for lockdowns. Herd immunity allows the rest of the world to progress, but China is unable to do so while having no natural immunity.
The latest mandate is for every major city to have a test site like this within 15 minutes walk of every resident. It looks like they're going to become a permanent fixture on the streets, and having a negative result will be required for going to school, work, shopping, or eating out.
There will be no living with the virus in China. It is pursuing a pandemic victory at all costs.
The general public's perspective of the lockdown quickly shifted once they revealed the zero-COVID policy and how it might last for more than 5 years. In a situation that can only be described as a dystopian nightmare, however, even if the state wished to, changing course at this point would be disastrous on both a political and a humanitarian level. The death toll could exceed 1 million, and that would constitute a failure on the side of the state leadership. According to Shanghai's Fudan University, it is totally intolerable given that the government is preparing for its 20th Party Congress, when the incumbent president, Xi Jinping, will continue serving as the party's leader for a third consecutive term. In order to go forward, the state authorities would therefore appear to have no choice but to allow the economy to stall and the public to become dissatisfied, despite the fact that this is unjust. Furthermore, the Chinese government must demonstrate its superiority, no matter how manufactured it may appear to their Western counterparts. Saving face is an important aspect of Chinese culture. In what ways does this affect the economy? Well, let's start with a sharp drop in domestic demand and rising employment, particularly among young people. 1/5 of young adults with college degrees are unemployed as of the date of the recording. One of the key problems contributing to the global recession on the external front has been the zero-COVID policy. The confidence of international companies that rely on China for imports and exports has decreased. The most extreme example is Apple, which is shifting some of the production of the iPhone 14 to rival India. the state government has more concerns than only economic and political ones. Young and educated people are seeing rising unemployment rates that reached a record high of 20% in July of this year. This is mostly a result of the economy's slowdown and the consequent decline in employment prospects. In May 2021, there was a popular online movement called Tangping, or Lie Flat. Basically, youth who were part of an online movement chose to slow down rather than play the rat race and climb the corporate ladder. But as of 2022, this movement has changed into Bailan, or to let it rot, a more radical one. These children are just doing the barest minimum to get by because they have entirely decided to give up on the system. The older Chinese generation, who have never witnessed anything like this in their lifetimes, is in full shock. The youngsters of Bailan believe that exerting extra effort will not be rewarded and that there is nothing to be gained by doing so. The Chinese authorities took notice of this quickly. President Xi Jinping stated that, quote, China's hopes rest in youth in a speech he gave to the entire country in May 2022, emphasizing the value of youth and their contributions to the nation as a whole. Their top priorities have long been maintaining inequality and expanding opportunity. But so far, actions like cracking down on big tech and outlawing private school tutoring haven't done much to change the situation. So that's a quick rundown of what's been happening in China. There was a lot left unsaid. When the rural bank runs, where almost 400,000 individuals are unable to access their life savings, were not even covered by our discussion. However, you get the gist. So, are the click-grabbing YouTube titles real? Will China eventually collapse? The solution, however, is more nuanced than that. It appears that China is prioritizing its political objectives over economic and humanitarian needs. China is in an awkward situation as a result of the ruling class intransigence. Major cracks are suddenly showing up all across an apparently unstoppable nation. Fractures that require more than a band-aid fix. A lack of trust by the populace in the state administration runs through all of the subjects discussed, and regaining that self-assurance will be a difficult task. The most likely conclusion in the upcoming years may be a slow-moving recession and political turmoil. But in the end, the study is too complex for anyone to provide a definitive response. However, more needs to be done to prevent matters from getting worse and to restore the public's faith in the government. One thing is certain: China faces significant risk in the next years, and how the Chinese government responds will determine whether things significantly worsen or not. How about the rest of the world, though? Well, these issues in China will undoubtedly have a significant impact on the rest of the world, particularly for those who rely directly on the Chinese import-export market. As the supply from China declines, we may anticipate that the inflationary tendency would continue. This means that 20% of American imports as a whole may be impacted. In addition, as more nations place their bets on domestic production, which results in less access to cheap labor, prices will rise as a result of the trend toward deglobalization. Because nearly 65% of Australia's total exports go to China, some economies, like Australia, could be in serious trouble. There is a significant exposure risk involved, and as most Australians are aware, there aren't many other trading partners who could support such a loss. Major setbacks will also be seen in some industries. The market for EV batteries is one example. 76% of the world's lithium-ion battery manufacture was in China, despite ongoing attempts by the government of the US and Europe to expand their output. The stark reality is that China is a significant economic partner that cannot be quickly replaced. The investment exposure that many nations have to Chinese debt and stocks should also be mentioned. This includes countless US and European investment businesses, not to mention all the funds that have lost money as a result of the recent spate of delistings of Chinese stocks. Furthermore, given that China is the second largest holder of US Treasury securities, the slowdown in China may make it more challenging for the US to issue debt. Positives include a decrease in fuel demand, the fact that China imports 80% of its needs, which will pressure prices downward, easing the current energy crisis, and a slight decrease in input costs for virtually every commodity produced. In general, the interdependence of the world's markets has long been the growth engine. A recession in one of the world's main economies signals a worldwide slowdown for the rest of the globe, which is both the century's Achilles heel and the way to economic growth. It will be fascinating to observe the changes that take place. Will this impact future global trade? Will the trend of globalization continue? Or will nations tend to turn inward and localize their production going forward? Only time will tell whether China's outlook or the world economy as a whole will change. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment box below. If you like this episode, feel free to browse the rest of the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon.